Hey guys, welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. I am currently on vacation, a much needed break from all things work, but I do have some videos in the docket for you to release, just so you guys aren't waiting 2 weeks just getting nothing, because I know every single day you turn on your YouTubes asking, where's the next Dill Pickle Movie Network video? I'm just kidding, I'm just fooling around, but still, I wanted to stay creative and stay putting out videos as I was away, almost just for my own peace of mind. And there's a video that I've been just waiting and waiting and waiting to release, but I haven't had the time to really just kind of throw together. I have all my sporadic thoughts out there, but I haven't really been able to consolidate it all. And I'm finally doing that here. And that is my New York Film Fest 61 review. Every single year since I moved here for college in New York City, I've gone to the New York Film Festival. It has been one of my favorite spots to be, one of the most amazing places to see a film, not just for the first time, but just see a film in general with so many other film fans, enthusiastic cinephiles. It is a place that I call my home away from home here in New York City. And I was very, very fortunate to be back this year experiencing the opening night, centerpiece, and closing films, which I don't think I've ever done before at New York Film Fest. Usually I'll only see one or two of them, but I was very fortunate to see them and so many other films, including Maestro. I was able to see Zone of Interest, The Taste of Things, MENUS-PLAISIRS Les Triois. I hope I pronounced that right. Hey, listen, some of these titles are a little tough, but I am going to tell you all about all those films right now, starting with the opening night film, May December. Now, May December is one of the most unique films of the year, and I recommend, if you have not heard anything about May December, don't look up anything. Don't look up what the plot is. I mean, there's a basic gist you get by some of the trailers, but even then, I think the more blind you are to May December, the better. And that's why I almost kind of don't want to tell you what the premise actually is. But for those who have seen the trailer, those who have expressed interest and already know the premise, I will explain it right now. So skip ahead 20 or 30 seconds while I just say this. This is about a woman, Natalie Portman's character, playing Julianne Moore's character in a movie and basically going to this town, to her home, to study Julianne Moore in her everyday life. Now, Julianne Moore, the big twist is that her relationship with her husband stemmed out of an illegal and inappropriate relationship between a adult and a minor years back. So Natalie Portman is not only inserting herself into these people's lives, but inserting herself into the lives of two peoples whose lives have really been overwhelmed by media, tabloids. You know, Julianne Moore's character very much still this very domineering force and very clearly has some really toxic traits to her. And then Charles Melton's character, he plays Julianne Moore's husband here, kind of being the receiving end of it, but not being a very vocal character in this thing. And I think that's definitely purposeful, because Natalie Portman, she plays an actress. She's very elaborate, very extravagant in her performance. You know, it's very detailed and very specific and precise, but it is a grand, almost movie star quality like performance that you would get in like the 50s or 60s from a Betty Davis or something like that. You know, this kind of grand classic movie star performance. And then you have Julianne Moore, who's playing this kind of very strong, not strong in the way that like she's empowering, but more so like just very intense person. And then you have Charles Melton playing such a different role. He is very much a softer exterior. He really carries a lot of the emotional heft because he is that kind of dampener to the loud noise happening around him. And it's such a great dichotomy seeing these two actresses and seeing Charles Melton at the center of it, because Charles Melton's character is really the one who goes through, I would say, the most growth, because he is the one who was a child when he got into this relationship. So he is not only dealing with the burdens of that and all of the stuff he's missed out on in his life and the almost premature maturing he's had to do in his life and the growth he's had to go through in kind of jumping into this relationship, in this marriage with this older woman, but also dealing with this actress who comes to town who shows interest in his life beyond just being a tabloid article. Natalie Portman asks him questions about his life, his emotions, his family, his relationship, his thoughts on things, which are things that Julianne Moore does not do. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic, because while Natalie Portman is studying for a role, just the bare minimum gives Charles Melton this feeling that there's more out there, that there is more to this life than just what his little bubble has confined him to. And I think it's just such an interesting little play here. There are some romantic elements to it. Like this does kind of become a little bit of a love triangle, but I think it's more so about the character study and the idea of this toxic relationship and one's view of it. And especially in the eyes of a performer, when you go to study something, how far do you go to make the craft perfect? And does that in and of itself make you more of a toxic individual? I think of the Jim and Andy biopic from years ago, where Jim Carrey was emulating Andy Kaufman for a movie he was playing in Man on the Moon, and he almost went a little too far with the method acting. Jim Carrey's my favorite actor, but I'll even admit he went a step too far, maybe. And I think this kind of explores that also with Natalie Portman's character, and the fact that Natalie Portman doesn't just want to be this character in a movie, she's almost essentially stepping into this woman's life quite legitimately by talking to her husband, by kind of hanging around her kids in her town, talking to other individuals in the town that Julianne Moore is not fond of, and getting the real inside scoop on this relationship. It's a film that I think could have gotten maybe a tad too melodramatic in the wrong person's hands, but Todd Haynes is able to rein it in so well and just craft this with such precision and elegance and exquisiteness. Like, I think this is one of those enchanting melodramas where, yes, the drama is at an all time high. It is dramatic. It does have that kind of old classic Hollywood flair in the performances, in the way that these performers act. I mean, Julianne Moore, she's a very expressive character, and Natalie Portman, because she's studying Julianne Moore and essentially becoming Julianne Moore through the movie, she becomes more expressive and more elaborate and more distinct in the way she says things with her mouth and the way she pronounces some sort of words, and there's this amazing monologue toward the end where Natalie Portman is quite literally transforming into Julianne Moore in front of our eyes in the span of like 5 minutes in a one take. I mean, one take monologues are like my bread and butter. I loved it in Mia Goth's Pearl. I loved it with Rebecca Hall in Resurrection. I just love a one take where the actor is just doing it for the camera, just giving it their all. And it's amazing here. This is an amazing film. As soon as I saw it, I went, that's going to be in my top 10 of the year. Like, this is a film that I think is so unique in its premise, but also just so well crafted and designed and written. I think the screenplay is brilliant. The acting is brilliant. There really isn't much to fault here, except for the fact that it is a very sensitive subject matter. And it is one that I think in the wrong hands could have been very misguided. But I think because these are the right hands, it works. But I do think it's a very kind of tightrope walk they're doing here with the subject matter that I think is honestly very bold. And I think it's going to be one of those films that a lot of people who see it, regardless of whether they like it or not, are still going to be thinking about and talking about. So it's definitely one of the more exciting films. Now for the centerpiece film of the New York Film Festival, I'm going to be talking about Priscilla. Now I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Priscilla because it's already out. People have already seen it. So it's not like I have to like incentivize you to go out to the theaters and see it, because it's been getting some good audiences. Elvis, the Baz Luhrmann biopic last year, was a big hit. People saw it. People loved it. It was nominated for a lot of Oscars. It didn't win any, but it was a big crowd pleasing hit. And I think Elvis himself is a very crowd pleasing, beloved American icon. But the thing that Elvis movie kind of shied away from was his relationship to Priscilla Presley. It probably in fear of tarnishing an image that is already subtly tarnished by his drug abuse and the stuff with Tom Hanks's character in that movie, that here they're really able to tap into. Now Sofia Coppola has this ability to really dive into the most unique relationships that a woman could experience. I mean, Lost in Translation is such an interesting relationship. I don't love that film, but it is a very interesting relationship between this woman and a very older man. And then you have The Bling Ring, which is a really interesting relationship between younger women altogether. And then you have something like The Beguiled, which deals with kind of backstabbing and love triangles and all that. Like, she has some of the most interesting films about women. And I think Priscilla is maybe my favorite of hers yet. I think it is so well designed, first off, which is going to be a common thread for all these films. I mean, it's beautifully crafted, of course. I mean, it's Sofia Coppola, but just the delicacy of this film, the idea that everything is so delicate and quaint and soft, just like Priscilla Presley, because she is such an innocent person in this film. She is a young girl. She is, I think, in ninth grade when she meets Elvis Presley and when he starts basically grooming her to where she hasn't been able to like live her full life. She still shows a maturity for her age, but she is a kid. And there's a whole dichotomy here at play where she is going to school while also living at Graceland, which is like this whole crazy, apples oranges comparison of lifestyles. It's like one day or 1 minute of a day you are a kid, and the next you're a grown woman. Expected to be a grown woman. You're expected to obey these orders. And I think Priscilla, the film, really explores the toxicity of this relationship that I think a lot of American moviegoers might be a little hesitant to accept, because it is a beloved figure. But I think Elvis is an interesting figure where you have so much media praising him and lifting him up. Baz Luhrmann's biopic being an example of a film that shows the glory of Elvis in all his stardom and in all his power, that I think it's okay if one or two times we have something that's a little bit more honest and is able to kind of strip down, the ideas of these beloved American figures. And I think that's a bold choice. There could be fear that Sofia Coppola could be very heavily criticized for this because she is taking such a beloved American figure and breaking it down. But I think when you see this film and you see how empathetic it is and how honest it is and how truthful it is and how well performed it is from all parties, from Kaylee Spaney, who plays Priscilla, with just the utmost elegance and just sincerity and empathy, but then also Jacob Elordi as Elvis, needing to be that charming figure. So then, as the film goes on, we can start to see the toxicity creep through the charm, and I think it's very important. I would go as far as to say I think it's an even better portrayal of Elvis than Austin Butler's. Austin Butler again fit the Elvis that movie was trying to show us, which is the Elvis on stage that we all know. But Priscilla's movie is more focused on the real Elvis. What was he like at home? What was his relationship like? What was this dynamic like, being such a significant age gap, but also being such a significant power play with this person who had so much power and this woman who was basically powerless because she wanted to be at first. But then as the film goes, you start to see her get more agency too. And I think another great choice, which isn't really a choice, it's more so a rights issue, but the fact that there's barely any Elvis music aside from one song is a very effective choice, because this is not an Elvis movie. It is a Priscilla Presley movie. It is more of a movie about a relationship, not a movie about Elvis or a movie about this Hollywood couple. It is a movie about a couple. And I think that's what is most important. And that's why I think Sofia Coppola was the perfect choice for it, because she's just trying to tell this story about this relationship. And in doing so, she's able to get some of the most raw, authentic, beautiful, but also hauntingly sad, depressing angles of this thing, and of just the overall perception of women in the eyes of relationships in the media. I think there's some interesting stuff with how Priscilla wants to go outside and play with her dog on the lawn, but you can't go outside because the tabloids will take pictures of you and the paparazzi's going to be there, and all these different things that you don't think about. You don't think about the pressures that some people are put under when they're in certain scenarios, and the fact that she walked into this so innocent, not realizing how much it would pressure her. And then at the end, the needle drop that plays at the very last scene is just so perfect. This film reminded me of Spencer, a film a few years ago that kind of showed us the real, authentic, almost tragic, kind of traumatic side of Princess Diana's life. And a lot of people criticized it because it wasn't truthful, or it was kind of bad mouthing the people that they should be praising, all these things. And I think, some films are just honest, and there's really no way to kind of combat that. And yes, you cannot like it, but to say that it's not worth telling or not important in telling, like, I think Priscilla is a very important film the same way Spencer is, and I think it ends with the perfect ending to give us, the audience, catharsis, while also still having that sense of sadness for what happened throughout, but still having a glimmer of hope that someone can overcome this. And I think that is what is so amazing about Priscilla, and I definitely recommend it. It's one of my favorites of the year as well. And now on to the final film of New York Film Festival. I'm still going to be talking about a few more films here, but this was the closing night film, and that is Ferrari, Michael Mann's newest film. And this was actually my first Michael Mann film. I know I covered The Insider last month on Picture This. That was my second Michael Mann film, but I did release that video before this, so that might be a little confusing. It's very interesting because Ferrari is very much a film made at the late point of someone's career. I mean, Michael Mann has been making movies for a while now, and this feels like a film that is released by a director who has been working for a while, because it deals with the theme of aging and the idea that you can be so good at something, but technology and surroundings are moving faster, it seems, than you are at times. And I think this is something we see a lot of directors kind of grapple with. Even Spielberg and Scorsese, some of the greats, the idea that these newer technologies are coming about. There's movies in 3D, there's streaming services, all these different things. Barely anyone shoots on film anymore, which is why Christopher Nolan and Quentin Tarantino deserve a lot of praise because they still do. But I think Michael Mann himself is trying to like look in the mirror almost and say like, wow, this is my place in a world that is ever changing, especially post pandemic, and just the way movies are made now, as opposed to even the 90s, is so different. And I think that's a very interesting conversation to have in regards to Enzo Ferrari as well. The idea of the car business and racing, and the idea of the racers themselves being younger, and the idea of brands, and the way the racing community and the racing environment has changed over time. That's a very interesting element of this film, which I really, really dug. Now, the part that the film feels even more interested in is Ferrari's home life. He has a wife played by Penelope Cruz, who he clearly does not love anymore, at least not as much as he used to love. And they kind of almost stay together solely for the business, solely for the image and the idea that he is a Ferrari and he wants to keep his name pure. But then he also has this romance with Shailene Woodley, who was a mistress who he fell in love with, had a kid with. He has essentially a secret family on the side. So there's a lot of intrigue in the fact that he is coming home to his wife, but during the day spending time with a secret family that his wife doesn't even know about. And I think that is a very interesting dynamic as well. The problem with Ferrari is that I think it's a little long, and I think the themes at hand are much more interesting than the actual execution of the themes. Like, I think a lot of it becomes redundant. It becomes very clear early on what the themes are and what is trying to be said, and the clear parallels between Enzo Ferrari's work in the automotive world and his own kind of view as a filmmaker, Michael Mann's view. And I think it's a little obvious, though it may have been the intention. I don't know. And I did really like how it didn't indulge just in racing sequences. That being said, there's an amazing racing sequence at the end that quite literally shook my entire theater. My entire theater gasped at the same time and just couldn't believe our eyes. So I really think it's a well crafted film. There's just something disconnecting for me, and I don't really know what it is. Maybe it's because it spends so much time with one plot over the other to where one gets lost at times. And then when it does shift gears, no pun intended, because of cars, when it shifts gears into that other story, then the other story that it was telling is kind of left to the side. I think it's a little hard to balance the car stuff with the home life stuff. And I think he tries his best, but it doesn't always work together all the time. And another problem is that despite the performance caliber on paper, I think some of these actors maybe weren't the best choice for this movie. This movie deals with a lot of Italian accents. There's a lot of that kind of House of Gucci stuff going on here, where it's very clear there's some actors that just are not necessarily nailing the accents, especially Shailene Woodley. I love her, love her, love her. She should have won at least 2 Oscars by now, but she is not the right casting choice for this film because her accent is just not there. And I'm not going to blame her. I think there's acting coaches and accent coaches that you could have working with these actors, but I don't necessarily know if that was a priority. I don't know if that has to do with the budget, the filming schedule. I don't know why more attention wasn't given to the accents, but at a certain point, you have to wonder, why didn't they just cast Italian actors as is? I think the only person here who's giving a completely convincing performance from start to finish is Penelope Cruz. That's why I think she might get some Oscar attention for it. But overall, I liked it. I think after watching The Insider, I'm like, oh, that is a masterpiece. So I know Mann has the juice. He's got the goods. But I think for a first Michael Mann film, I think the thematic stuff going on is really interesting in regards to mortality and aging. But I think the actual execution of some of the themes and the different plot lines and the length and pacing is what was left a bit to be desired. So it is not a glaring recommendation for me, but I do think there are some scenes, especially that one racing scene that I alluded to, that are worth it for the price of admission alone. So now to take you through a few other films I saw at the festival, let's talk about Maestro. Maestro is the newest film by Bradley Cooper. It's his follow-up film to A Star Is Born, but this is such a huge swing if you're just looking at it first film to second film. I mean, usually directors, they take a few films to get going in terms of getting bigger budgets and being able to really kind of go all out in spectacle. Whereas Bradley Cooper, after making a film that I will say is a brilliant film, I love A Star Is Born, but a very quiet, almost more intimate film, he then kind of blows it out of the water in terms of scale and proportions and loudness and costumes and cinematography. It is such a big swing for a second film that I feel like only Bradley Cooper really could pull off because he's Bradley Cooper. He has an established name as an actor already, but very rarely do you see a director on their second film being given this much free reign to go as elaborate as he does. Now, that's not to say Maestro is a better film than A Star is Born. I think A Star is Born is still a tighter, stronger, and just more emotionally investing film. But Maestro is just such an impressive directorial upgrade, in my opinion, in the way he's able to just kind of up the ante, this lavish music playing over top. And I guess when you're making a movie about Leonard Bernstein, you're obviously going to get great music to go with it. But the way the music is incorporated, the way everything just feels so grand and cinematic was the thing that I took away most. And I did see this film at the David Geffen Hall, and Leonard Bernstein actually performed and conducted on that very stage. So to watch that film, Bernstein's kids actually introduced the film, and to watch that film up close in that hall where Leonard Bernstein once connected, it was almost like this spiritual thing going on where I was just like sitting and taking it in because I was watching legacy unfold before my very eyes. And I think that is kind of why I left so astounded by the spectacle, because I think that room just kind of absorbed sound so well, and the images just popping off that screen. It was in Dolby. It was just such an amazing cinematic experience that, regardless of what the story was, because the story is pretty straightforward, it is Leonard Bernstein's whole life story in terms of meeting his wife, played by Carey Mulligan, and then him trying to hide his sexuality, but then kind of embrace his sexuality, but still maintain his relationship. And then also into his later years, dealing with his wife's illness and him himself as an older man. It's a very straightforward biopic on paper, but I think because of the person Leonard Bernstein was, the actual craft is able to match the overall gigantic spirit of him. That's what Bradley Cooper gets so right here, is that everything is so extravagant, so amazingly crafted. And I do want to watch this film on a smaller scale to see if it works for me in the same way, because I think a lot of it could do with the epicness of the proportions at hand. But I do think it is still a strong script. Like, don't get me wrong, it's a little bit more formulaic from biopic standards, but it still is a very, very well written movie. The characters have a really amazing arc with one another, especially Carey Mulligan. She is the true heart of this film. And I know a lot of people were questioning when they saw that she was being campaigned for lead and she was actually getting first billing on the poster. People were like, Carey Mulligan's the lead of this? She is. And when you watch this film, you'll very clearly see why. There are some sequences in this thing that are some of the best of the year, and I hope it gets some awards consideration. I think it will. And if you are a musical theater nerd, I will tell you right now, there are so many great references to West Side Story, to On the Town. I mean, the On the Town references on their own. I mean, Betty and Adolph at the piano themselves singing Carried Away. It was so awesome. And there's only going to be like a small percentage of people who understand how awesome that is, that Betty and Adolph are singing Carried Away while Leonard Bernstein is playing at the piano. It's just so amazing to see a film that cares so much about musical theater and music in general and classical music, while also telling a really dynamic family drama. Because this is almost like Ferrari, two different stories in one. It's him as a conductor, but it's also him as a father, as a husband, as this person who's, kind of toying around with his sexuality and not necessarily knowing what he wants to reveal about himself, even though he knows what he is himself. I think that is very, very interesting. And I think there's a lot of interesting things about Bernstein's life that people might not know that are shown to light in this film. And while it is honest, it doesn't really try to demean the character of him either. I mean, there are moments where he is, obviously called out for some, wrongdoings, but at the end of the day, it is still shown why he is a genius and why he is, so revered, and why watching it in Lincoln Center at the place he stood on when he once conducted, I mean, there's a magic to it. And I think this is kind of one of those movies that epitomizes movie magic. And I think Bradley Cooper could be looking at some more Oscar nominations, plural, because I think he could get nominated for director. I think it's very, very likely he'll get nominated for actor, and he may even win. The next film I'm going to be talking about is The Zone of Interest. Now, this was probably the film that piqued my interest. That's the last funny thing I'll say about this movie, because this movie is not funny whatsoever, but it is one of the movies that piqued my interest the most when looking at the slate of New York Film Fest titles. And that's because this film, the premise of it intrigued me. It is basically centered around a Nazi family during World War II in Poland, while they live next to a concentration camp, yet we do not see any of the concentration camp. It is all centered around this family, and it's supposed to show this dichotomy. I talk about dichotomy a lot in this episode, this review, because it's true. There is a lot of dichotomy here with the idea of this family living this perfect little lifestyle, yet all this horror is happening over the fence. And I think it's one of those movies that is just so jarring. I mean, the first 5 minutes is just utter blackness, where the score by Michael Levi, which I think is one of the best scores of the year, is just like booming through the speakers to where you're almost left speechless. And I was almost left speechless. I don't even know if I liked this film, if I appreciated this film, if I hated this film, if I loved this film, because it is one of those films that feels like it was made as an art piece more than it was a piece of entertainment. And I really appreciate that. It is just trying to show this lifestyle and create horror from the natural, just daily slice of life moments. And I think that is what's haunting, is that these people are living next to such terror, and they barely bat an eye. And we see when other characters come into the picture, I think one of their mothers stays with them, and the mother, she can't sleep at night because she's like, what is going on? She leaves. And I think that is very telling. And I think that's the audience's perception too. It's uncomfortable to watch. It's not fun to watch, but it is intriguing because you, as someone who is educated and knows all of the hardships and the actual good and evil of the Holocaust, you're watching this knowing that this is complete delusional. The fact that they are just living this lifestyle with such happiness when all this is going on, it's almost baffling. But you also have to understand that at the time, they think they're the good guys, and they think that this is a happy, perfect little house and a happy little life. And that is what creates such an interesting effect. Again, I don't think I was entertained by this. I don't think I enjoyed this. I don't think I'd recommend this even. But I think for what it is one of the most unique films I've ever seen. And I think it is one of those films that's going to get a lot of people talking in a good way, maybe in a bad way, but I think it's still going to lead to conversation nonetheless. And I think one of the most important elements to this film is the cinematography and the sound design. So the cinematography, this is very interesting, and I'm very fortunate to sit into a Jonathan Glazer Q&A after this film, but he talked about how he wanted the actors themselves to literally feel like they were just living their lives and not feel like they were filming a movie. So they rehearsed their lines and they would do the scenes, but the cameras were almost hidden from the actors. It was almost like, when you see those shows, like, I can't believe I'm comparing this movie to these shows, but like in Practical Jokers or like Kitchen Nightmares, where there's like hidden cameras around, or even like Big Brother, even though Big Brother, they're aware of the cameras, but the idea that the cameras are watching them and they have no idea that the cameras are on them because they're very methodically placed throughout this house. That is so intriguing to me because the shots in this thing look really good. It's very well shot, very well designed, and it almost made me feel like a 1917 vibe where like every single shot had to be perfectly conceptualized by the cinematographer and with the director, to make sure that the shots were perfect, and they had to place them at the exact right angles and, put them in the exact right lighting situations. Again, you have to light a scene without making it obvious that the lighting is there because you want the actors to have the authentic experience. That takes a lot of time and a lot of thinking and a lot of planning, and I think it's one of those things that, like, regardless of whether you like the movie or not, you can't not think that that's impressive. You know what I mean? So I think that was one interesting element. And then I also mentioned the sound. The idea that the concentration camp is literally over the fence, they don't shy away from that in terms of the sound. We hear the sounds of the war the entire film, but it's so subtle. It's kind of like when you live in New York City and you're always constantly hearing car honking, and you constantly hear, the sirens of police cars and stuff, and you really don't bat an eye at that either. You really don't give a crap. You're just like, oh, I'm just a New Yorker. I'm used to hearing those sounds. But then when you go to like a farm and it's completely quiet, and you're like, wow, I forget how often that sound just recurs in my city. It's kind of the similar deal here where you don't realize when you've lived somewhere for so long that these sounds just become your everyday soundtrack. And the idea that these characters sleep comfortably when there's gunfire, when there are screams of pain, when there's literal gassings of, horrible, horrible acts going on outside their house, and they just are able to brush it off as if it's just It's just sound outside. It's just noise. It's just noise to them. And that is what is so intriguing about the soundscape in this film, because those sounds also are so meticulously crafted, because you have to make the audience understand the dichotomy here. And the way they do that so well is showing us this idyllic lifestyle while also hearing the horrors going on in the background. And that is why I think Zone of Interest is probably the most accomplished technical film I saw at the film festival, but also the one I least want to rewatch. So interpret that what you will. I have two more films to talk about here in the film festival, and this is going to be a little bit briefer because they're two films that I feel like not many people really know. They're not really on their radar, and they're very, very closely connected in themes. So I figured I'd talk about them at the same time. And that is The Taste of Things and Menus-Plaisirs Les Trois. Again, I'm working on my French. These are two movies that deal with food. The Taste of Things is a romance film about these two chefs who later in life discover this newly kind of ignited fire between them, and through that they fall in love, and they use cooking as their way of like expressing to one another their love. And then Menus Plaisir Les Trois is a documentary by the great Frederick Wiseman, who has made so many documentaries just about institutions. He did one just about a college, just kind of exploring the everyday daily whereabouts of college. He does this thing where he just kind of takes his camera, films something, and does it for like 120 hours, and then funnels that down to 3 or 4 hours. Now, this movie is 4 hours long. It is a 4 hour long documentary, but because you're seeing so much different stuff about this Michelin star restaurant, you are a fly on the wall of a Michelin star restaurant for 4 hours. And I don't know about you, but that is a pretty fun way to spend 4 hours. Just watching these chefs make these really elaborate, delicate, beautiful, artistic plates of food, innovative plates of food, innovative flavors you would never think to combine with one another, and doing it at the level and the caliber that they do it. I think it was a very interesting experience. Now, do I want to rewatch this over and over and over again? Probably not. But I think it's amazing for what it is. And if you're into that, even if you're not into that, I think watching this, maybe just even for a few hours, you'll really get invested into this kind of different lifestyle. And I think it might be even more impactful to someone who doesn't know a lot about like fine dining and culinary arts. It might be more worthwhile to watch this film and kind of just become immersed by it and entertained, while also being educated on what it takes to run a restaurant of this caliber. It's kind of like what they kind of make fun of in the menu, but it actually is their livelihood, and you actually see why it means so much to this family that cooks there. Now, back to The Taste of Things really quick, because this one, spoiler alert, is my favorite film of the festival. Now, I know it sounds a little weird because no one's talking about this film. Everyone's talking about, Maestro and The Zone of Interest, but I really think this film got to my soul in a way that not a lot of films do. And that is because it brought up so many amazing memories. My family has always been so linked to food. I just lost my amazing dear Aunt Kim this past July. And one of the things that she most inspired in me was this love for cooking and love for food. Every year, or every 4 years, I should say, for the Olympics, she would make a meal every day depending on the host country. So when it was Beijing, she would make different Chinese food every single night, homemade. When it went to Russia, she made these like Russian dishes every single day. She was such an amazing cook and such a creative individual. And this film reminded me of her, but also other amazing food memories. My Aunt Rochelle, her Thanksgiving meals were always my favorites. And then my grandma, I mean, her breakfasts, the way we would come down from sleepovers at my grandma's house and smell the bacon and be invited to this glorious breakfast spread. My dad, he's a huge griller. He loves to grill. He loves to smoke meats and barbecue. And my dad's barbecue is the best barbecue we've ever had. My mom, I mean, I have a lot of just nostalgic food interests that relate to my mom's cooking, like her chicken nuggets. They're just chicken nuggets, but they are the best chicken nuggets because they're her chicken nuggets and she makes them homemade, and it brings back those memories. My nana, her blueberry cheesecake's my favorite dessert I've ever had. My sister's deviled eggs are the best because she learned from me, who also learned from my grandmothers on how to make deviled eggs. So I think there's just so many memories about food that this film, The Taste of Things, inspired in me and brought in me and just kind of made me think about and made me kind of get emotional over, especially having lost a loved one recently, who had such a connection to food. Like, I was just reminded on how food can act not just as, nutrition and as a way of survival, because it is, but also, these things that we take for granted could also be something beautiful, can be art. And that's something to say about the documentary as well. The idea that food is not just food, it is love, it is communication, it's spirituality, it's connection, it's sensuality in this sense. I mean, it's a love story here. And the idea that food kind of is their flirting, they cook dishes for one another and it's supposed to be kind of sexy and beautiful. Like that to me is the best cinema ever. Like this is such a great film, and some people may not love it because they may not be the biggest foodies, but I think the way this film is shot and portrayed and the way it's directed, I think even if you're not a foodie, I think you can appreciate the connection that these two have through their art. It's like any art, any hobby, any love, any interest. You know, you don't necessarily have to share that interest to be intrigued by someone else talking about their interest. Like, for example, I've never really gotten into the show Supernatural, but the way my brother talks about Supernatural makes me love Supernatural. So, like, it's one of those things where just watching someone else love something and care about something and put so much love and connection into making that art together. I mean, there's so many amazing sequences where the chefs are just cooking with one another and with younger kids, teaching them how to cook. A lot of the film is just spent cooking, but that I think is the root of cinema, is seeing these characters that we can relate to as audience members, but seeing how other characters relate to one another and how they themselves influence the people around them and how the people around them influence them. And in this sense, also the food they eat and create can also influence their relationships. This is kind of the root of what I love about cinema. It's human relationships, it's connection with one another, it's great story through connection, through characters. This was a beautiful film, and I highly recommend it. I know a lot of people had pushback for it because France submitted this as their international feature submission instead of Anatomy of a Fall, which a lot of people love. But I think I haven't seen Anatomy of a Fall yet, but I think this is the right choice because it is still a beautiful film, and two films can be great. Maybe one is better than the other, but either way, this is still a great film, and I hope people don't just dismiss it because it's not Anatomy of a Fall. I hope people actually give it a chance because it is such a beautiful film. So that is all my voice will allow right now. You can tell it's getting a little hoarse as I talk, just because I've talked about so many different films. But are you excited for any of these films? I know Priscilla is already out. May December is already out. May December will be coming to streaming soon. Maestro as well coming to streaming soon, and then those other films will be trickling out in theaters over the next month. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know which ones you're most interested in down below. And stay tuned for some more reviews here on the channel as I talk about some other films that I haven't done reviews for, like Killers of the Flower Moon, like The Holdovers, like The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Those reviews are all coming to the channel very, very soon over the next few weeks while I'm away on vacation. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.